Julie, are you running this today?
Well, sort of, yes. We're going to start out with a presentation from Wade Klein, who's our KLJ consultant. I'm guessing most of you know Wade, but he'll kick it off for us, and then we'll do some talking, and then whatever questions you guys might have. So,
great. Is this on? Push the button. Good. Well, good morning, Mayor Mahoney, members of the commission. How do I bring up the PowerPoint? Julie, would you mind just a run around the table introduction, please?
yes.
Some of us may not know each other.
Absolutely. Thank you. Good reminder. I'm Julie Baumann, and I'm the City of Fargo Transit Director.
Jordan Smith, one of the Assistant Transit Directors.
Hi, Susan Thompson, Finance.
Dave Pepcorn, City Commission.
Mike Rethinger, City Administrator.
Cole Swingen, Assistant Transit Director.
Tim Mahoney, Mayor.
Denise Kolpak, City Commission.
John Strand, City Commission.
Arlette Preston, City Commission.
Brenda Derrig, Assistant City Administrator.
Wade Klein, KLJ Engineering. Well, thank you, everyone. To kind of, I guess, open this discussion up for the benefit of the mayor and commissioners, we have been working under contract with the City of Fargo and the City of Moorhead since about June or July of 2023, looking at a sort of a reorganization study for the two cities as far as the transit department. A couple of things that we'll focus on here this morning, and I'll keep my remarks as brief as possible. The reorganizational study looked at a couple key areas. One is sort of governance recommendations for how the system is sort of managed and what the cooperative oversight would be. Coming up with a recommended organizational structure and staffing plan. We looked at some of the FTA funding changes. Of course, the overall metropolitan area is now a transportation management area. You went up in over 200,000 with the 2020 census. That impacts funding. It impacts some of the reporting. The other pieces that we looked at were some cost-sharing concepts as the systems continue to coordinate themselves, City of Fargo, City of Moorhead, and some of the state and federal agencies, and then some of the interlocal agreements that are necessary as the system continues to evolve. The big change, of course, with the 2020 census is that the Fargo-Moorhead area is now a transportation management area. What that means for the cities of Fargo and Moorhead relative to the federal transit funding is that you are now all a direct recipient of the federal aid that previously flowed through each of the two departments of transportation, whether it would be MnDOT or in the case of the City of Fargo, the North Dakota Department of Transportation. So early in the process, we did coordinate with the two cities, the two governors, and FTA to cooperatively designate the City of Fargo as the designated recipient for the federal transit funding that will come to the Fargo-Moorhead urbanized area. So that's a little bit of difference. Of course, you know, in the case of some of the FTA funds, the cities already had a good deal of control over those funds, but now the change is that you know, the cities become direct recipients as opposed to having to pass through and coordinate with each DOT. And of course, the cooperative decision was that we would identify Fargo as the designated recipient for all the federal aid that would come into the Fargo-Moorhead metropolitan area. Now, you know, there will be some transition here over the next couple of years, particularly for some of the operational funds. The City of Moorhead likely continues to be a direct recipient for some of those funds as we continue to spend down older year grants. But initially, as you start to move further into the future, 2025, 2026, you know, the desire is that we would kind of look to the City of Fargo to be that direct recipient. So then more of a cooperative decision making, you know, with the City of Moorhead and MnDOT on how those federal funds are spent. And then of course there is the potential for continued subrecipients for the federal aid, but that's kind of the big piece. Because you are large urban already, I mean, there's a lot of the administration and administrivia that goes along with that federal funding has been managed fine. So not a lot of changes, but you know, it is a little bit of a nuance as you move into this TMA piece. Now, With the additional responsibility, unfortunately, comes a reduction in some of the direct federal operating assistance that the Federal Transit Administration apportions to the Fargo-Moorhead metropolitan area. You'll see on the screen here, when we do a year-over-year comparison between federal fiscal year 23 and federal fiscal year 24, which of course started October 1st, the city of Fargo, for example, is anticipated to lose about $600,000 in federal operating assistance. The city of Moorhead is anticipated to lose about $270,000 in federal operating assistance, so that certainly has an impact. We're not able to do a year-over-year comparison for some of the other federal programs like 5310, which would be sort of specialized transportation, and 5339, which would be capital funding. We are encouraged that North Dakota DOT has indicated a willingness to apply some flexibility to some of their statewide federal transit funding to allow some of that to continue to flow to the city of Fargo. DOT doesn't have the degree of needs across the state to use up all their federal funding. So I think what Jordan and Julie have been hearing is that, DOT will continue to apply flexibility in passing some of those funds on to MapBus, which would be good. It's not likely that we'll see some of that same flexibility from MnDOT. Of course, MnDOT has greater statewide needs than the North Dakota Department of Transportation. One of the opportunities, of course, as the metropolitan area transitions to a transportation management area, is other federal aid, particularly federal highways funding that is administered now through the Fargo-Moorhead Metropolitan Council of Governments, or MetroCog. That funding, of course, is also available to the city of Fargo and the city of Moorhead to apply for transit capital. So that's something you work through your MPO on, as far as trying to make sure that some of your capital needs, rolling stock, facilities, shelters, those kinds of things, are integrated into that process. So as the MPO develops its plans and programs, that MapBus's capital needs are prioritized along with every other surface transportation program that you fund within the Fargo-Moorhead area. So there is a funding piece to this. We knew this was coming. I mean, this is something we've talked about for many, many years. We knew that when you went up and over, that there would be some reduced operational funding that came along with that, along with the additional opportunity to work with the MPO on using some of their flexible surface transportation funds for capital. A big piece that we do need to look at also with the reorganization is sort of repurposing the MAC Coordinating Board. Of course, the MAC Coordinating Board has been around for 20 years. The first version of that was really implemented to help us transition to the Metro Transit Garage. And then there was a version 2.0 of the MAP board, I think around 2008, 2009, I think, somewhere in there. So we're kind of ready for a version 3.0 that would sort of, launch MapBus into this new organizational structure. You see kind of the framework there for what we would envision as a kind of what that MAP board looks like. In working with staff and administrative leadership from the partners, it does appear we want the next MAP board to be a little bit more of a technical, political kind of board. I mean, we do want the Fargo City Commission, the Moorhead City Commission to have commission council liaisons, but we also want the board to also operate with some technical leadership, particularly from transit and finance, just to reflect the fact that we're kind of operating at, we'll be needing to operate at a little bit more of a higher level, but also allow that hybrid approach of merging political leadership with technical guidance to make sure that we're able to sort of operate the system in a cooperative nature. So that will be a big next step as we move through this. Probably the biggest piece of this whole effort, I think, for the commissioners to be aware of is the org chart that we've put together. And we've gone through quite a few iterations of this, and it's been very cooperative between the cities as we put this together. The big piece is that, Moorhead will be losing its transit manager. Lori's here. Of course, Lori's worked on transit for, I don't know, practically 40 years. Huge part of the system. She'll be retiring. So, we really build this org chart around the reality that we're going to lose those years of experience and that track record that Lori has provided from the city of Moorhead. So the org chart really depends on, kind of, adding a senior accountant at the city of Fargo that would take on some of that administrative responsibility for some of the Minnesota component of the system that the city of Fargo would be integrating or taking over management of. Currently there are 2 additional Moorhead staff members that would need to be pulled in. A couple options have been put on the table. One would be to transition those 2 employees as City of Fargo employees, or look at Fargo continuing to contract with the City of Moorhead for those employees, but we've provided the recommendation for the protections of those employees. Either way, we do need to make sure that decisions would be made on whether they would be pulled into the Fargo org chart or contract with the City of Moorhead by the end of this year. I think that has something to do with maybe North Dakota PERS and those kinds of things. So we would want to make sure that we're expeditious about that component. I'll go through the 2025-2026 org chart here in a second. What you'll see on the 2026 org chart, is this study does kind of point towards the desire to move towards bringing in the drivers and some of the operations staff that's currently a third-party contract into the Fargo org chart in 2026. That's something that transit staff has been working on incrementally. It looks like a big jump, but this is something that transit leadership has really been working on, bringing over initially some of the dispatch staff, some of the operations staff. It's been incremental, but now the final piece of that transition really involves some of the supervisors and the operational staff to sort of move away from that third-party contractor for some of those components. And then all of that would require some position review, evaluation, and classification. So the big piece, again, this is a multi-jurisdictional effort. So as we looked at trying to, satisfy the desires of the City of Moorhead and more specifically, their primary funding partner, which is the Minnesota Department of Transportation. We sort of went through an exercise, and I apologize, there's a lot of information on this slide. We went through a process of looking at, what does Lori Van Beek, what does the Moorhead Transit Manager do now? She does a lot. And how do we redistribute those responsibilities across this proposed org chart? So you can see, what would the director do, Julie? You've got 2 assistant directors, Jordan and Cole, a mobility manager. The office manager position, I would note, doesn't come online until 2026. That would be a part of the, potentially taking that operational contract in-house. And then that senior accountant position that would be recommended to be added here in 2024. So, we have achieved some consent between the 2 cities on how we'll reallocate those transit manager responsibilities across the proposed org chart. And that's important too for MnDOT to be comfortable with the fact that, are we going to continue to maintain that level of service, that administrative oversight? How do we assure the City of Moorhead that we're going to continue to, get those things done on the other side of the river by managing them through the City of Fargo? So the 2 org charts, I've got a 2025 org chart, and then I've got a 2026 org chart. The piece with the 2025 org chart that I would point out on the left-hand side, you'll see that's your current contract with TransDev. That's your operator for, sort of your management, your safety, some of your road supervisors, your training, your bus operators. For 2025, the recommendation is that continues to be a third-party contract for the year of 2025. What you'll see in yellow would be new positions that would be added or would essentially transition over from the City of Moorhead. So you see the senior accountant, we're looking at that as, it shows up as a new position, but, part of that spells the loss of the Moorhead Transit Manager. The Office Associate 3 would be the City of Moorhead employee that would come over, Jackie Engel, and then the Mobility Manager is currently, or Marketing Manager, I'm sorry, is currently a position that is a City of Moorhead employee that would come over. So you can see there the 3 yellow boxes and how those fit in as far as the 2025 org chart. The green boxes are recommendations that we've worked through at the staff level as far as trying to shore up some shortfalls relative to going from left to right, some of the paratransit dispatch, fixed route dispatch. There's been a bit of a backlog there in terms of, what MapBus needs as far as the day-to-day. You see the fleet services attendant, same thing for Jordan in the shop there. And then, you know, working with the HR team at the city of Fargo, I mean, we're talking about, you know, over the long term of 25, 26, you know, certainly going to be some additional FTEs that would need to be managed. So, you know, putting a placeholder in there for the need to make sure that human resources has the ability to manage some of that new staff that would come over in 2026 for that new, for that contracted staff that would potentially become City of Fargo employees. So this is sort of the 2025 piece. And I think before I move on to 2026, you'll see we built this structure around what's there today. So, you know, Julie is the transit director, you know, Cole is sort of the operations lead, and then Jordan is sort of the fleet and facilities lead. So we put this structure together really trying to build it around the existing, I guess, three-legged stool that you have now as far as a management structure with Julie, Jordan, and Cole. So for 2026, really then the change is if you kind of toggle between, again, looking, you know, in 25, we still maintain that vertical org chart of trans dev as sort of a contracted piece. So then when we get into 2026, you'll see that the proposal would be, you know, bringing those FTE in-house and primarily on the left-hand side of the graphic there, you'll see a lot of that operations, the road supervisors, the fixed route paratransit operators, you know, would come in underneath of the operations part of the org chart. Some of the other blue positions you see as you kind of go over into Jordan's area of the operation, you see some of the safety and training, the training specialist, and then that office manager would be a contracted position that would come internal as well. And so that kind of just gives you a sense of how we go from, you know, kind of a contracted environment into internalizing some of that staff. And then, of course, on the right-hand side, you'll see some of those external department supports. 25, the recommendation, of course, with the senior account and the human resources generalist, those are integrated, IS, legal, and other components of the org chart. So it did take a number of iterations to go through that.
Yep, and just a quick comment. I think I made this at the last transit coordinating board too, but another city external department support should be communications with the marketing manager dotted line. I think I made that recommendation at the last meeting as well, just so there's coordination there with the overall communication, planning, and strategy. Thank you.
So the agreement framework, as we, you know, kind of get to where we are, I mean, a number of the agreements that currently exist, you'll see on the left-hand side there, City of Fargo agreements with NDDOT, West Fargo, NDSU, you know, nothing really changes there. Probably a lot of the heavy lift that needs to occur over the next, well, ideally 4 to 5 months, maybe it's more like 6 or 7, is we do need to get that joint powers agreement updated. That is really between the City of Fargo and the City of Moorhead. We'll talk a little bit about an interim amendment to that agreement we probably need to think about just to sort of bridge the gap. And as part of that joint powers agreement, that purchase of service agreement, which would include, you know, sort of a cost allocation component between the City of Fargo and the City of Moorhead, because that's really what MnDOT will be looking at, and it's going to protect the City of Moorhead, it's going to protect MnDOT, it's also going to protect the City of Fargo to make sure that, you know, how are we allocating costs, how are we sharing costs, because we really are going into a mode of doing things a little bit differently. But, you know, fortunately, you know, staff has worked through multiple iterations of sort of, you know, taking 2 budgets, putting them into one, redistributing those costs across the system. So many of the agreements remain the same, but some of those internal agreements between the 2 cities will need to get updated to make sure that we can support this. The cost-sharing approach took a little bit of work. I think in working with staff, I would say we're probably 90%, 95% of the way there in terms of trying to, you know, take really 2 municipal budgets, you know, put them into one, but then looking at system operations, whether it's revenue hours, ridership, revenue miles, looking at fixed route, paratransit. The two cities have really done this already for 20-plus years, so this was really just trying to take, sort of two separate kind of more informal processes for sharing costs and put them into a single silo and try to distribute them out. Here, I won't go through all of these, but really looking across 9 or 10 cost centers for how costs are shared between not only Fargo and Moorhead, but West Fargo, NDSU as well. So looking at, all of those partners and make sure that we're distributing costs accordingly. And they have been in the past, but this just, it's not only a formalization of how we're sharing costs between the primary cities, it's looking at making sure that those other major partners their costs on the system are being accounted for equitably. Same thing with revenues. The revenues are sort of put into, 8 or 9 different bins to make sure that, whether it's, the Minnesota state aid, the Minnesota funding, the North Dakota state aid, the North Dakota federal funding, making sure that all of that is allocated back to the systems. And this will be important relative to transparency for your major partners like NDSU, for West Fargo. Are they getting access or credited for their share of the system revenue, particularly the federal aid? Same thing with the city of Moorhead. They will want to make sure that we're being very transparent with them as far as, the MnDOT grant, the federal aid that is apportioned to the urbanized area based on the Minnesota share of the population. So this has taken quite a bit of work, and we have gotten to what I believe as your consultant, a pretty equitable distribution both of costs and of revenue. Certainly some details to work out, but it does appear that there is a pretty good framework in place. And we have met a number of times with sort of state and federal agencies. I know we haven't been a part of some of the federal agency coordination, but I know both Julie and Lori have been working closely with FTA Region 8 out of Denver. We have met repeatedly with the Minnesota Department of Transportation formally through this process. And then, of course, Lori and her team have met in sort of smaller group settings with them just to make sure that we are keeping MnDOT plugged in and on board with all of this. So some of the next steps that we really need to think about would be kind of creating this interim map board. We need to sort of evolve the current map board, probably by an amendment to the current joint powers agreement, so that over the next 4 to 6 to 7 months, that board can really work on updating the joint powers agreement, which is going to be kind of a big lift, but we want to make sure that that's run through kind of that technical political hybrid committee that the process has identified. Over the next several months, this new map board would work to continue coordination communications with your key partners, make sure that we're overseeing the transition to our 25 org structure, make sure there's a transparent and cooperative process for making a decision on some of the big changes that are proposed for 2026. And then again, the day-to-day, the budget principles, the cost allocation plan, coordination with your state and federal partners, including the MPO as well. So with that, I will see if there are any questions on this component of this morning's presentation.
Wade, can I ask you a question? It's frustrating to me that we have more responsibility and the federal government reduces the amount of funding. And so with MetroCog, we kind of had this similar experience. I don't know if you're familiar with the other commissioners. We wrote a letter to the state and got some additional funding in the short term. And so I'm just throwing out there, is that a possibility? Because that doesn't make any sense to me. We're getting bigger and then they're reducing the amount of funding. So if you don't mind. First of all, hi, Wade. I haven't seen you for a long time.
Hi, Dave.
Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you this morning, Dave. Yeah, and but we knew this was coming. We knew that once the TMA designation occurred, that there was going to be less federal funding for operations. I think the big piece is that last bullet on the slide that we talked about, as far as then working through, because now the TMA, Dave, the MetroCog has more federal funds that it's responsible for prioritizing and managing, and that is working through that cooperative process to figure out, can we make up some of our FTA shortfall through the FHWA program?
So can I just add one more, Mr. Chair? So the letter that we worked was effective. We got additional funding, and so if we need to do that again, I think we should consider that, because what we did was we had all the entities that were impacted sign the letter, and it was very influential. And so I'm just throwing it out there if that's a possibility, but that's a legit thing. I mean, from our perspective, just, it's ridiculous that and especially when we're basically, updating everything, and it's going to take some more money, not less money. So anyway, I don't want to beat up on this subject, but I think if we need to sign a letter and have all the entities, I think they would be willing to do that this time as well. Thank you.
Okay, I think we'll move on to Susan and I are just going to touch on a few things, and then, of course, open it up for some conversation. And believe me, I have no intention of reading all of this to you. I just wanted to give a quick overview on where we've come from. And start in 1984, the cities got together and decided to build the Ground Transportation Center, which is our facility downtown, where we do our main transfers. And then you can see through the years, the different efforts that have been put into looking at either some type of transit authority or a joint group like we're talking about doing now, and the different studies we've done. And we've done everything as recent as our transit development plan in 2021. We looked at it at that time. We actually had a standalone study the year before, both done by SRF, regarding an actual just transit authority and looking at setting up. There were different options that came out, but it was a good study. It addressed a lot of the issues. And so this effort with KLJ, we're building on a lot of the things that we've done over the course. Now, granted, I was on here in '84. I didn't start till '98, but we've had a lot of progress, and we're hoping we're taking the next logical step in the process for this. Just a quick update on where we kind of stand today with our driver services that we have. Wade touched on the fact that we have a third-party contractor. Both the cities have a contract with that provider. They are separate contracts for fixed route, TransDev. They used to be First Transit. They've actually been with the city of Fargo for quite some time over the course of I think they started in 1997. But coming together and having the same provider has been very, very beneficial. It's nice to have one GM to go to, one set of supervisors, work through everything instead of that effort across the river that we've done in the past. So just one point of clarification, the city of Fargo has a contract with TransDev that includes fixed route and paratransit. So we contract for everything paratransit. We run that system, and then we bill out to the other entities that participate in that for the whole metro-wide service. Prior to 2021, we had fixed route dispatchers as part of that contract. We brought them into the city of Fargo in 2021, and we don't have enough time to go over all the positive benefits that we've seen from that, but it has been a tremendous improvement from our perspective and from the dispatcher's perspective as well. And in 1998, the city of Fargo brought on the paratransit dispatchers and reservationists. They previously had also been part of the contract. And I know Commissioner Preston was here at that time when that happened, and we transitioned them away from the contractor and brought them on board, and that was a vast improvement. Hopefully the complaints and such taper off quite a bit. This is just a quick snapshot of ridership for the whole system. So this is metro-wide, 22 to 23. You can see we are trending back up with our fixed route ridership. Paratransit, which is the service for people with disabilities, they call in, they book individual trips, they get individual service. We go out, we pick them up. Fixed route is the larger buses you see running throughout the metro area, and people pick them up along pre-designated routes. But I want to break down, we look at the ridership, and we look at the fixed route hours that we've got buses out there. and the miles that we put on in the system. So I wanted to just give you a quick look at what we're looking at. And there have been some fluctuation. You got to take COVID into consideration. Those numbers are still showing up in our residual 22. We did cut back service when COVID was here. Moorhead has bounced back to go back to their full service levels. Fargo's still working on that. We're very close, but we're not quite there yet. And then I broke it down between just Fargo and West Fargo so we could just see the North Dakota side. And I did throw in a few extra statistics there on the number of dispatch calls that the paratransit folks take every day. Yeah, it's an average of 127 calls. These are the people calling in and booking rides individually on the service. It's a very busy place. Right now, we've got 3 dispatchers in that area. And grand total, we have, is it 7 dispatchers call or 6?
6 total.
6 total. And we currently do not cover our full operational hours. We do for paratransit, but we don't beyond 7 at night. We just simply don't have the staff. And then I also threw in a stat there on the number of calls that come in through our main dispatch center as well. So it's a very busy place. And they do all the sales of fair media that people use on the system, and they take all the complaints, they answer all the dispatch radios, they deal with the drivers. It's a busy spot. Just a quick, who's using the system? I know it's a very basic thing, but we have a lot of folks that ride for various reasons, and we have a wide variety of folks that ride. We have the adults, we have some very good agreements with the local colleges. That's a large ridership. And then we have the elderly and disabled population, and we have some youth and children. We separate those youth as K through 12, and then children are under that age, and they do ride for free. People take the service to a lot of places. They take it to work, education, healthcare, recreation, everything. So measuring those metrics has fluctuated a little bit post-COVID. We don't look at just ridership anymore. We look at a variety of things that go into the service. So what's the answer? What's the answer for serving all those populations? Part of what we talk about a lot. Workforce development, that's one of the big things. Jobs are a significant destination for people, and getting people access to those. If we're your only source of getting to and from your job, that's a big bite for us.
Julie, might I just ask, I'm sorry.
Absolutely.
Workforce development is absolutely key in these balcony views. Another topic I hear a lot about is transit connected to develop for housing. Is that on our radar, where as there's new developments, as there's new growth to the edge of the city, as there's new industrial park or Amazon, not just housing, but is that also as prioritized as workforce?
Oh, yeah, it is. One of the challenges we face with housing development is frequently we will have it where it could be, Elliott Place is a good example. It's built out a little further in location, and it's close to one of our fixed routes. When it came online is the soonest we were involved in the conversation. So the expectation, I think, for some people, at least based on some phone calls we all received, was that we would be able to bring service there. Now, paratransit, yes, we take service anywhere that's within the boundaries of the city. But fixed route right now, we can't meet that need. I would have to take service away from someone else to meet that need. So involving us in the conversation ahead of time is very beneficial. So that, I think, is something that we could work on. It is a big consideration for us. And as far as reaching out more outlying areas like the industrial park, we still have our micro transit or tap ride. I think probably most of you are familiar with. We still have that. And we also have one that serves the NDSU campus late at night, or, well, within our operating hours, but after hours of our regular routes that run up there during the day. And that is well-received and well-utilized. The industrial park fell off quite a bit when COVID hit and people were tapering back. It's starting to pick up more now. But we are looking at, in our transit development plan, which is our 5-year plan that takes into account all of this stuff, that's coming up at the end of this year as well. We're starting that process. So all of that will be pulled in and looked at. So did that?
I have another, back to workforce development. The chamber's working on this pretty robustly, and as part of their grant program, transportation as a barrier is one of their scholarship opportunities for New American Community, as well as any other barriers. So my question is if there's coordination with the work they're doing and a conversation about maybe some funding opportunity to address the transportation barrier?
I was contacted by the chamber several months ago. It didn't go any further than our initial contact, so there haven't been in-depth conversations with that group.
Okay,
But we'd be happy to participate in any of that.
thank you.
If I could add just a little bit. So the growth plan has certainly incorporated some concepts in regards to transit-oriented development. And as we go into the LDC rewrite, both from the development side and from the incentive side, looking at that concept to incorporate, better transit development will be hopefully part of the process.
Yes, we have been involved in some of that, so yeah, credit to planning for stepping up on that. Yeah. And then I'm going to turn it over to Susan here for the financials.
All right, so as we talk about transit and the future of transit, I think it's important that we all kind of get a snapshot of the history and where we are right now with transit. There's a lot of complicating factors, so what we tried to do is make this kind of a simple spreadsheet to kind of show some of the points that I want to make. I just think it's really important that we kind of enter this new kind of phase with our eyes wide open. Revenues are generally flat, and our expenses are increasing significantly. So I want to point out a few things on this. There have been some complications with transit as well that haven't helped really with the transparency of the financials. Until 2020, transit was part of the general fund, so it was just kind of melded in with the rest of the general fund departments. In 2020, it moved to its own fund, so it kind of stand alone. That coincided with COVID. And then we got the very top line, number one, you can see between 20 and 21, nearly $10 million worth of COVID revenue. So that was great, but it also kind of camouflaged some of what was going on. And then the second line, federal operating grants, we get a certain allocation every year, but we don't have to use it every year. Well, we moved that to different years. So it's kind of carried us through a few years. So now we're to the point where that money is gone. And then if you look at some of the green lines on the revenues, ridership, state aid, and NDSU revenues, they've just been very flat over the course of almost 10 years. Then when you move down and look at the expenses, energy, number 16, the first yellow line, that's doubled since 2016. Within the other services, the big one is bus driver services. We all know how challenging it is to find truck drivers and similar occupations in this market, but that has nearly doubled as well. And then something like security services, that's doubled as well. And then salaries within the department, they've added some people, and just with cost of living over the course of the years. So what this shows are lines 29 and 30. So 29 is when it was a general fund. So basically, where we were short, that was a general fund subsidy. So in 2016, it was $613,000. Now that it's an enterprise fund, we have to transfer out to cover it, so it's recorded a little different, but basically it's still a subsidy. And what we're seeing is, we moved up to 2 million, 2.5 million. 2024 is looking at $5 million. So I think, that needs to be the topic of conversation. I don't know that the city has the capacity or the appetite to fund it at that level. But I think we all just need to see a clear picture of where we are so we can have good conversations on sort of the next steps. So Julie, if you'll flip the slide. So I proposed some short-term and some short-term solutions, and then we'll have to look really hard at some long-term solutions. I think for 2024, I've been watching the financial statements with the interest rates where they are. We've been getting a lot more interest revenue than we had budgeted. We were pretty conservative. So I think for 24, we can manage that funding gap that wasn't budgeted through that. But going forward, that's where this group, we're going to really need to put our heads together and think through what we need to do. As I mentioned, the North Dakota State Aid has stayed flat. It's about $600,000, somewhere between 400 and 600. And really, transportation is more than just a transportation issue. It's a workforce issue. It's an education issue. It's a health issue. We just need to make that point known and try to get more money from Bismarck. As Commissioner Pepcorn mentioned, with the changes in the grants, we're losing money there. I think we need to talk through the implications to cities the size of ours as we go from small to large. That's a big jump, and it's a lot of money that's eliminated from budgets, and communities like ours can't really afford that. So, perhaps there's either more operating money or a shift. There's a lot of capital money available, but we need it for operating, just keeping the doors open day to day. We're also, want to look at adjusting some of the financial allocation models with the partner entities that we have. Or the other one is to look at pursuing additional dedicated revenues, which generally means some sort of tax. And then the other, those are kind of the obvious ones that we really don't want to do. Well, I guess the first one sounds kind of counterintuitive, but we talked about adding routes to West Fargo, which would be more money at the beginning, but it would then allow them to help share with a larger portion of the overhead costs that we allocate, because they'd have more transit miles and customers, which is what we use to allocate those. And then the other ones, those are the ones that we just really don't want to have to do if we don't have to, but cutting some service, raising fares, eliminating some existing routes. So those would obviously not be our choices. Anyone have any questions on this? It's kind of a lot of information boiled down to.
Mr. Chairman? So I'm assuming with this, Susan, we don't have projections going out the next years. I mean, does it continue to have that kind of spike?
Yes, it will. I don't have the 25 budget on here because we're still working on it. I expect it will look similar, but maybe even a wider gap, because as they negotiate the driver contract for that one more year extension, there will likely be an increase. So, so without some significant structural changes in the revenues, it's just going to continue to look like that.
Is one of the proposals or considerations, I'm always assuming, is it $1.50 per ride now?
Yes, for an
And is one of
adult
the
fare.
proposals,
Yes.
will we be affecting that rate in the future, would you expect, to the rider?
We've talked about that amongst the group, and yes, that's always an option. But what I learned is, there's some studies that they do, and as the rates go up, then you have people that don't ride anymore, and so that's kind of a double whammy, because then you don't get the fare revenue, but then you don't also have the ridership, which is what the federal money is based on. So it doesn't really gain us much. And when you look at the fare revenue, it's kind of a small percentage of our overall revenue. So even doubling that isn't gonna, even if we did something as radical as double it, it's not gonna make a huge dent in that.
And bear with me, that gets down to philosophy. Do you want to provide your community ridership and to what degree? If I had a magic wand, and Julie and her team know this, and it's not my unique thinking, I would go to free routes and double or triple or quadruple of the number of riders that would provide better service, give them more efficiencies in their own lives, cut their own costs for transportation, give us people more access to work and to everything. If I had a magic wand. My concern is if we did go the route of increasing rates, we're just penalizing the poorest people, not necessarily, but some of the poorest people will be paying more out of their life to ride. And so I'm just really concerned about that whole dynamic of us taking limited people and squeezing more out of them to get to their jobs. And then we have Sunday routes, and we have route services, and then we have Amazon and other services that are requested. It's just a real dilemma that our community is facing. Someday I'd like to see a study or an analysis of if we did convert to as much as possible free ridership, what would that look like and do? And would that be worth our investment when we have 1.2 million riders now and we're spending $12 million on the overall program? I'd be just curious how those numbers would shake out and whether the community would consider that a value to aspire to give more transit to more people all the time as a community investment for those right reasons.
Yes. I think we agree with you on the rate comment. That's why it was weighed on at the bottom. We want to protect that as much as possible.
There's technically difference between Fargo and Moorhead. If we look at percentages of supplementation of the program, Moorhead gets some state aid as well. If we had to look at this, let's say, need legislation from the state of North Dakota to be like Minnesota, is it not true that in Minnesota you get a state aid check, you get a federal check, and then you have a city check or no city check?
There's not much of a city check, but the state of Minnesota is very generous with transportation.
Can we see a comparison sometime of how much we're having to supplement as Fargo versus Moorhead in that sense? Because that'd be one question, because I know they have some come in, and if we theoretically went to the legislative body and said, hey, Minnesota supplements transportation, and to John's point, workforce, we need that, and keep the cost down for people to work, what would the state have to do to help workforce to supplement that? The second question I have is, when we converted to this new metro kind of system, it's amazing to me that we actually lost support. It got worse rather than better. For years I had heard, it'll be a lot better because we can control a lot of this, but it actually looks like that's worse for you when you do that. Is there any federal legislation? Is it that the city of Fargo is just in a unique position in the Midwest that this is what happened with this transition? Or is there something in other cities and metro areas that do this, that there's some other funding sources that makes up for the federal decrease in funding?
I think the big piece is there were changes already over the last decade. The law used to be that once you hit 200,000, you'd lose all your operating funds, and it'd have to be used solely for capital. At some point, I believe it was under MAP 21, where they provided flexibility, so now it's a gradient based on the number of peak service vehicles that you have. So you're still able to use the majority of your federal options. So there has been some flexibility added, because it would be worse were we 10 years in the past. I guess I maintain that, you have to use the flexibility of the MPO process to look at, the total federal aid flowing to the communities, specifically that federal aid that's, apportioned to the North Dakota share of the UZA, to figure out, how do we prioritize our transit capital needs in relationship to other surface transportation programs that are there? I think so that would be one piece, Mayor Mahoney. I think the second piece would be, how do we begin to look at some peer communities and understand that, how did they adjust their local contribution? Because we've talked about sales tax, we've talked about other sort of vehicles that would give the city of Fargo more flexibility to make up that difference with local funding. So I think that's probably something you have to do as well. That's what other communities have likely done.
But wouldn't it be true that Bismarck, Minot, Grand Forks, all North Dakota systems are almost rural systems where we don't have the population base that a large community has? Does that make us, quote, unique and maybe look for a different funding on a federal level? Because to me, you just don't have, if your ridership isn't 1 million or 1.5 million, or to your point, John, the fares aren't paying for this system. It's part of it, but it's not really it. It's really you're providing service for your community, and it's a vehicle to get to work if you don't have a car. And if we're in the green world right now, why wouldn't you make sure your transit was cheap, easy to get and do stuff? I just got back from an Ireland trip, and I was amazed of the amount of different transportation vehicles. We've always talked about a rail line, and through their town, they had a rail line going. Fantastic. Came, stopped, moved, went along, beautiful facilities, beautiful buses, beautiful everything. So big metro area, Dublin, I understand that, but it's just that, the fares were very cheap. You could hop on anything and go anywhere. But to me, the reality is we can't sustain this funding as a city. We just don't have the funds that fund that, and we don't have a model. Sales tax is out. It would be hard to do sales tax for transportation. The public won't necessarily support that. They might if they get more into we got to look at ways to get cars off the road, but this community seems to be, let's get cars on the road, have easier ways for transportation. So my question is do we strategically have to look at 1, federal aid, what can we do in that area, 2, state aid, what can we do in that area? It is now June. If we're going to do anything in the state, we're going to have to get in those conversations. But I think the commissioners have to understand what is the difference between Minnesota and North Dakota. And in my mind, Minnesota supplement funds all of this to the point where it doesn't cost City of Moorhead that much money, right? As far as if you look at their budget versus our budget, we're putting quite a bit into transit. And you're talking about HR, where you're adding people, when you did the HR loads, we're continuing to add people and add expense, but I don't see the revenue stream going up. So it's you're flat on your revenues and you're adding more people, you've just increased your expense over the next 2 years, I would say. But is that true that there's a marked difference, and or could we have a discussion with the state and say, hey, this isn't working, and it's workforce, commerce, whatever you want to talk to, who you would talk to, but we almost have to start politicking that now with our legislative people if we're going to try to help out this program.
Yeah, Mayor and Commissioners, thank you again for your time today to talk about this. This is what I call a tectonic plate revenue and expenditure issue for the city budget. And the reason that we wanted to flag this particular item is because this is one that not only presents itself, I like Susan's term, after the COVID funds kind of camouflaged a bit of our expense condition over the last several years. This is not only an issue that will impact us in 25, but in 26, 7, 8, and 9. This is about long-range financial planning. This is it right here. This is one of those issues, no different than public safety when you talk about the general fund and what the general fund is exposed to. Mayor, to your question and observation, the general fund and the Fargo resident and the Fargo business owner is exposed to more cost for this service, no question about it. And part of that's philosophical with the state DOT, but there are other opportunities. In addition to what Wade has identified, we're just now on this slide that perhaps we could just talk about very briefly, whether it relates to motor vehicle sales tax, whether it relates to additional state aid opportunities. I think there could also be an opportunity, although Grand Forks is not impacted like we are today. You identified the cities, Grand Forks, Minot, and Bismarck. Could we work together on some state aid changes and formula changes that could benefit these larger cities? I think that's a great legislative topic. That's a strategic topic that I think we absolutely should spend some time on. So it's a multi-pronged approach, I think. And I just want to support what Wade said. It's not just going to be changing a funding formula for North Dakota. It's also going to be some other legislative changes. So I just want to appreciate or just acknowledge and appreciate Wade's effort on the reorg study, but our staff too, in trying to help us understand this condition long-term. This wasn't created overnight. It's not going to get solved overnight. And this is something that is really strategic and long range. That's going to take 5 years of effort, I think, to really put us in the right direction.
With an emphasis on the fact, this is clearly a workforce issue, to Susan's point and everyone's point. It needs to be a focus.
I agree. You know, we talk childcare, we talk housing, we need to incorporate transit into every single one of those discussions. You know, as a critical workforce, there's 40,000 jobs in the state. You know, and if people are going to fill those jobs, they have to have these basic services. And the biggest pool of jobs are probably here. You know, so we have to be able to connect these dots. I would think, you know, and last thought is I have, and this is my way out in the future, what will look like, but, and we've talked internally, if we were to create a transit program right now from scratch, out of nothing, I'm curious what it would, I still want to know what that would look like. Because you're back in 1984, there was no Lyft and Uber and ride shares. There, you know, everything's changed so dramatically. I'd just be curious if we started from nothing, what we would do to provide similar or better services today with those changed technologies and availabilities of service. And I don't know. I'm just curious. My guess is we would consolidate our arterial routes and have more door-to-door service, more tap ride type adjunct services.
Microtransit, yeah. It's
Microtransit.
kind of our buzz term for that, yes. And that will be a big part of the transit development plan that's coming up, is how do we transition to include more of that type of service? Do we incorporate it into having some of our paratransit services that are out there? You know, build some of that into there if they're out in the outlying areas where we don't have a fixed route. Do we? Yeah, because some places do that. So there is, it's been a whole dynamic shift in the industry to have those types of services.
Bear with me. I
available.
remember Commissioner Pepcorn and I were at a national conference once and waiting in line to ride autonomous transit vehicles. Someday, that's going to be added to our mix.
Yeah.
Or we're going to have autonomous vehicles providing maybe some of that. And I don't know at what point that surfaces and becomes part of our approach and availability, but you know, there will be changes coming in those regards too, where we might have driverless vehicles doing some of this work.
Did you write any of those? I'm just curious. 'Cause I haven't done that yet, but I would love to. Real quick on the next slide, I did break down a little bit on how North Dakota has historically done some of their funding as far as what comes to transit. And there's kind of a supplemental little handout there. Nothing has really changed since 2005. We get our state aid, which is based on our elderly and disabled ridership throughout our Fargo and West Fargo groups that ride. And we have not seen any changes from those revenue, which is motor vehicle registration fees, since 2005. There has been incrementally over each biennium, there's been a little bit added here and a little bit added there, but it's nothing that's been sustained beyond what was actually done. So I think to Mayor Mahoney's point and Commissioner Pepcorn, we have a lot of work to do with the state. And the agencies like Jordan is on the Dakota Transit Association board, and those are all the transit agencies within North Dakota. And we were just talking yesterday about that group needs to be very proactive in approaching the legislation or the legislature again and getting some long-term sustainable funding legislation. And we very much appreciate the biennium interim monies that have been introduced into the system, but we need something more. We really do. And we're looking to you guys for help on that. Minnesota, I didn't go into a lot of detail there. I just know that, basically the transit funding for their programs has been at an 80 to 85% of their budget supplement that comes in addition to the federal aid that comes through. So yes, the state of Minnesota definitely steps to the plate when it comes to transit, and they definitely are good at it. The thing with North Dakota, with the mention of the other cities, Fargo is the only one that has moved into the large urban designation. So we're in a pool now nationwide with anybody that's comparable in size to us, going after that same pot of money. Prior to that, we were in the small urban, so it was a different group. But Minot has moved into that size, Grand Forks, and Bismarck, they're the only other cities in the state of North Dakota that are part of that small urban and go after that pool, and then everybody else is considered rural. So that's a different pool of money that they go for. So just real quick to address that. And I don't need to belabor any more of this. I've just pulled up some national trends and what some of the other agencies are doing. And just a quick address to the workforce issue when it comes to us getting drivers. We're not the only ones. As you can see by this, 96% of agencies have had a big impact on their ability to hire drivers. And so without drivers, we have no service. You know, how do you address those issues? And there's different approaches that some of the agencies have used. Higher pay is one of them, better benefits, more attention to what's going on the street, boots on the ground. As far as their safety and security goes, that whole landscape has changed over the past 4 or 5 years. They face a lot more out there than I think anybody's aware of on a day-to-day level. And when we're looking at some of the budget shortfalls and this fiscal cliff everybody's talking about, the approach that some agencies have used is exactly what we're talking about, going after more state funding. I understand the local increase funding is definitely a challenging topic, but that is what some agencies have done. So this is just a reflection of a study I was looking at. Seeking other revenues with beefing up advertising. And advertising has been a dynamic factor for us over the years. We hit a peak where it was going very well. That has tapered off a little bit too. Reduced service is always an option. It's not a good option, but it is an option. And like we talked about, seeking increased fares. One of the least likely things that they're willing to pursue is to reduce the workforce. If you reduce your workforce again, you don't have service. And that's not what we're here for. And this is my final slide. It's just some of the takeaways and how other agencies, most other agencies, at least half, are facing the same things we are with fiscal cliff and dollars and such. So I think what we're here for is to get this out in front of you. We understand it's a lot of information to throw at you. I know Commissioner Kolpak and Strand have been part of the MAP board, and Commissioner Pepcorn as well, and understand a lot of this swirling around in the background. But what we're looking at is, you know, Wade's done a wonderful job on this study, and just getting some input from you on what you think about the study and how the direction we're going to take or want to take, and any discussions that you might have surrounding that. So just to wrap that up there.
Julie, I'm just curious, as you all forecast the future, and we now have a defined footprint for our boundaries of our communities as the diversion placement will happen, that has to be an immense stretch in our services too, as we grow further to the edges and need to provide services there too. I mean, I can't even begin to calculate how and when that'll impact us and to what degree.
Yeah. Well, currently with the fixed route system, actually the federal rules are, if you have a fixed route system, you have to provide the paratransit, complimentary paratransit to people with disabilities in a 3/4 mile corridor. That's what the feds require. Years ago, prior to my time, the philosophy was adopted that we would provide that service throughout the metro area and any of the city boundaries. So we continue to do that. That is one little thing we could look at. The other thing is we have no fixed route service on Sundays Therefore, we don't technically require to have, these are all difficult discussions, so I'm not blatantly throwing these out. But we could have the discussion that maybe we do not continue to provide paratransit service on Sunday. Again, I understand it's difficult. Because the people with disabilities, what options do they have when it comes to those? There are other options in the area, that's a given, but that's one option, that's a tough option. And some things like that other agencies are doing, but they're making tough decisions as well. We just want you guys to have the information and give us some input and guidance on what you think, so.
Well, I'll just add that clearly legislatively, we need to have this conversation with our contract lobbyists and figure out our strategy for who we're going to approach and how, at the state level for sure, but also federally, what conversations can we have with our congressional delegation, and what other opportunities are out there, so.
Well, if I could just close out too, I want to again thank everybody for the time today. I would also envision a product that comes out of this, and I think a real tool for the commission would be a 2 to 3 year look at a plan about how we're going to get this ship pointed in the right direction so that by 25, 6, 7, you have an idea of how we're going to stabilize this. So there's some good recommendations in the org study. I would appreciate any additional conversations that commissioners have about what to do on an interim basis that Wade highlighted. And as the coordinating board takes that discussion to the next level. But I do think that on the financial side, we would really like to continue to work this and try to develop a good short to mid-range plan that the future finance committee could receive at quarterly meetings as well. Because I think this is going to be an issue that will be with us for some time. So we really need to put in some good thought on this one and make sure we're giving the commission the best tool that we can to manage this.
Michael, one last thought. As we approach incentives and development in our community, maybe we really connect these to each other a little more. If somebody's building apartments or developing and creating new jobs, let's really put transit on the radar as a discussion and a need. If we're supporting development and enhancing and giving incentives to give growth, we shouldn't be incenting people to go where there's no transit, or we should make sure that that's part of the formula as often as possible.
I think that's, yeah, thank you so much.